This time on Poll Hub, the pandemic and education. What's the impact been on the tens of millions of school kids who've been in class, on Zoom, and pretty much everywhere in between? Probably not what you think. A Stanford economist has a new paper out that busts some of the myths that I think we have, and she's our guest today. It is a great and meaty discussion, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
We have, over the last year, talked a lot on this show about the pandemic and all the different, public opinion data around so many facets of that. But one thing we've come back to over and over is schools. And we have asked the question without really having an answer for it, because it's not the kind of answer you can get from asking people, the question, do you get the really good data about this? But what is the impact that this is all having on the kids who aren't in the classes? We live on Zoom, but we're adults. And even then, I don't think any of us love living on Zoom.
That can be questionable at times.
Yeah, okay. But we are living in this hybrid world right now, and so many students have been for so long. So we have been wanting to talk to an expert about this for a while, and we have one. Caroline Hawksby, who is the Scott and Danya Baumer Professor of Economics at Stanford University, has recently written an article about these very things that we are talking about. It's on the Brookings website, and it'll be linked to in the show notes. Caroline, welcome, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here and talk to you today.
If I could just start with kind of the highest level question, and then we can dig in. Are kids... Is there a detriment, and how big a detriment is it to these kids who have lived through the last now 13, 14 months of mixed up learning, hybrid, remote, whatever it is?
Okay, so I have two things to say about that. Thing number one is that it's not going to be the same for all students. So if you come from a family that's pretty affluent, so you have lots of computers around the house and laptops, and your parents are well educated and reasonably technology savvy, and they're very motivated to ensure that you actually are sticking to working on the laptop or working remotely, then not only have you probably not been hurt, but you might have been helped, okay? Because there are a set of kids who actually do at least as well, if not better, with home learning than they do in school. I don't mean to say that they're not hurt at all, because their social skills are probably being hurt and some other things are being hurt.
But academically,
they're probably fine, and you could probably make up those social gaps. If you're at the other end of the spectrum and you have parents who are not technology savvy, you do not have a home environment that facilitates remote learning, maybe your parents find it very difficult to engage with your schooling process. They're just not motivated to do it, or you're not motivated to do it as a child.
Or they're working, two jobs.
They're working all the time. Exactly. They can't pick, it's just, you could be losing quite a lot. That being said, okay, so that was my thing number one, is that there was this big inequality, okay, between people who were probably not losing anything and might actually be gaining, and people who were potentially losing quite a lot. Here's my thing number two. It really matters what stage of your education is, what stage of education you're currently undergoing. So if you were a high school senior or a junior, this is probably pretty consequential, because these are very big years and you don't have very much time to make them up. So if you lost a lot of learning in your junior or senior year of high school that you would have otherwise had, there's only so much time you have to make that up before you go to college. If you were an adolescent, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit more, that's a very crucial stage of your brain development and of your intellectual development, and you also might have lost quite a lot. On the other hand, my guess is that if you're a second grader, you're fine, because you have a lot of years to make it up. You're not going to be a 12th grader for another 10 years, right? And so sure, your second grade year was not the best second grade year ever, but second grade is, having a sort of slow second grade is probably not going to kill you. So I think we need to be realistic. Not everyone is going to suffer tremendously.
I find that really interesting, and I think has been counterintuitive to what has been the discussion, at least publicly. Most people have felt that children who are younger in the lower grades in school have had there's a sense that they've had a greater difficulty because they are so parent dependent. And the fact that high schoolers, because they can be more independent, should have had an easier time of it. So what is the basis of that disconnect? The fact that we have this kind of public perception that older kids are actually better, but perhaps not by the data.
Right. So the data does not confirm this idea that the older kids are actually better. Older kids, if they're good at doing online learning, then they're good at doing it. But also there are a lot of older kids who are really bad at doing it. So that it is not, and they have very little time to sort of make up the gap. So that's the first thing, is just how many years do you have to make up the gap? And let's just think about this for a second, and then I'm going to get back to, I think, a really deeper question that you're asking as well. Let's say that your child, for some reason, got a very bad case of, I don't know, pneumonia or the measles or something like that, and missed out on 4 months of schooling, 3 months of schooling in the second grade. That's actually not that uncommon, okay? That does happen to people. And we know that if your child misses out on 3 months or 4 months of schooling in the second grade, your child actually makes it up over time. There's very little evidence that when your child is going to college or when your child is in college, that somehow your child is paying for that second grade measles
Very interesting.
experience. Okay, so there's just no evidence that that's true. And if we look back at the 1918 flu pandemic, in which schools were canceled for a good proportion of the year, we don't see that children who were third graders or second graders or something like that were, later on as adults, seem to have missed out. So I think it's just a lot of years to make up those. I'm not saying that we don't care about second graders or third graders, but I'm just saying they have a lot of years to make up the deficit, and that some children do not have so many years to make up the deficit, and that adolescence in particular is a difficult period to make up. But I also want to point to what I think parents are really saying, and I'm going to be a little harsh on parents here, but I'm going to be frank. A lot of parents, what they're saying is, I really don't like having my second grader need so much of my time. And my high schooler is more independent and isn't driving me bananas. Okay, now I'm not saying that's not true, but that's like the parents talking about themselves. That's not actually the parents talking about what my second grader is doing. I also think one of the things that I've found fascinating is during the pandemic, I think parents previously thought, when my child goes to school, my child pays attention 100% of the time.
Yes.
My child gets all of the questions right. My child is constantly attentive to the teacher. No, it turns out your child was actually not like that at all. Okay. And now you're getting to see it at home and you think, oh, my child has suddenly gone downhill and would have otherwise been a perfect child. But if you look at the statistics on kids, they're not like that.
And not like that in the classroom.
Caroline, it's only in your and my classes that they're getting that 100% attentiveness at college. That's obviously
exactly. My students are 100% attentive. Let me guarantee they never, ever, ever look at their phones or their laptops.
I like that 100% attentive. I wanted to ask you back to your first point before you want to take a deeper dive about the inequality issue, because we know there is a technological inequality that's now being exacerbated. The divide is widening because of the COVID and just the availability of broadband and computers and all that throughout the society. But one of the things I thought was very interesting in the Pew Research survey of late last spring, and they actually found that people of lower income parents were 76% of them were concerned about their children falling behind as a result, and that another group were similarly talking about the outbreak as somewhat causing a problem that they were feeling that they were now did not have the resources to address. And so I think it's interesting that for those families, I guess it's not a motivational issue, it's just the availability of resources and the sense that this was going to have an unequal detriment to different folks. So I'm sort of echoing the sentiments that you raised in the first point.
Yeah, I just want to break it down into three different pieces. First, there is the availability of a space that the child has to be engaged in school that is quiet, where, the only, people aren't jumping all over the child. There's not a lot of background noise or whatever going on, background activity, and that maybe the only person who's going to be intervening in that is a parent who will be doing some sort of supervision, but who will be trying to keep the kid on the rails. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is just the technology. Does the child have, say, a laptop that is reasonable for doing schooling? And I should mention, you do not need a gaming laptop to do this, right? You need a very, very basic laptop, which is not going to be very costly. So I'm going to come back to this point. And the third is, do you have reasonable access? You do not need hyper fast, gigabit kind of internet to do online schooling. You need reasonable internet access. So on the first question, that's really about, what's your home life environment like? Do you have a place to do this quietly? Can you concentrate? Number two, on the laptops, I think this makes me angry as an American. Why? Because there is no shortage of laptops in the United States, and cheap laptops are widely available, and we spend $15,000 a year per pupil in the United States on education. How much does a very cheap laptop cost? A few $100s.
Mm-hmm.
How can they have saved so much on not having kids in school and not having to pay fuel bills and electricity bills, okay, that they have more than paid for the laptops. And so I feel this is inexcusable. Every student in the United States should have an inexpensive, simple laptop. There is no excuse for that. It's like they're cheaper than textbooks in many cases, right? Your math textbook could cost you more than the laptop, because the textbooks, frankly, are monopolized and the laptops
Sure.
in a competitive market. The broadband internet is a bit more of a problem, because in some areas it's very adequate, and in other areas it's not. I would like to ensure that every student in the United States has reasonable internet access, but they do not need gigabit stuff. They're not gamers.
So this is a problem that can be addressed, and it can be addressed reasonably.
It could be, yes,
right.
And it's not that expensive, and that's part of my point. Is it seems inexcusable to me that when kids are in school, we can spend this amount of money, and when they're remote, we say, oh, it's impossible to address these problems. No, it's not that impossible to address these problems. We got to figure out how to do it.
The name of your paper is Advanced Cognitive Skill Deserts in the U.S. What is an advanced cognitive skill desert, and what does that have to do, or not what does it have to do, but how does that play into this conversation we're talking about?
Okay, that's great question. So first, let's just say, what is an advanced cognitive skill? And then we'll talk about what a desert is. So by advanced cognitive skills, I mean the cognitive skills that people acquire when they are start acquiring when they are in early adolescence. For girls, that's between the ages of 10 and 11, and for boys, it's a little later, 11 to 12. It's a very well-defined set of skills. For instance, even if you were going to turn out to be Einstein later in life, you could not actually do Algebra 1 until this age, because you need to develop your frontal cortex, or the front part of your brain. And until you develop this front part of your brain, there are just certain skills you cannot have. Okay, they include, in math, it's very easy because Algebra 1 is basically this very clear barrier between advanced cognitive skills and not. But also, if we're talking about, say, literature or history, advanced cognitive skills are things that allow you to read an historical narrative or article and abstract some principles from it. So the abstraction, the synthesis, this is also advanced cognitive skills. Now, we're not talking about something, I said Einstein, so that was probably misleading. But advanced cognitive skills, as I defined in this paper, is about 37% of the American public. And it's pretty much anyone who can do very basic Algebra 1. So if you look at the problems that are actually given to people on this test of adult cognitive skills, they're not, I think everyone who's on this podcast today would say, oh, these are really pretty easy problems. Okay, so we're not talking about, do you have the cognitive skills to go to Caltech? Okay, do you have the cognitive skills to be an advanced physicist? This is, if you are a nurse and you have to make a calculation about someone's dosage, could you do that? Okay, or if you were reading an article about history and politics and you needed to take some lessons away from it, could you do that? Okay, we're talking about 37% of the Americans. That's the first part of my answer.
That's the cognitive skills. What about the desert?
What about the deserts? So the interesting thing about cognitive skills, in my opinion, is that if you do not get them at some point, and this is the subject of some of my other research, but if you do not get them at some point when you're in your adolescence, you probably are never going to develop them. So this is this very, very key period of time. And so we want to look at, it really matters whether you get them or not. And what I do in this paper is I say, let's look at the distribution of advanced cognitive skills across all the counties in the United States, not just states, but counties, because I'm interested in more local areas than big states. Because it could very well be the case that in a state, like some of the states in Appalachia, for instance, most of the counties have very, very few adults who have advanced cognitive skills, but some counties do have a lot of adults with advanced cognitive skills. And so that's what we're looking at or that's what I'm looking at in this paper, is trying to understand, why is it that some areas of the United States seem like they're almost bereft of adults with cognitive skills, and other areas are, there's a plethora of people with advanced cognitive skills. And that's what I do. I sort of map it out across the United States.
So what does that take us? Yeah, I'm just curious. What does that allow us to do? So I'm looking at the map right now, and it's fascinating. There's an area in California that has low attainment, and then the highest attainment probably anywhere is in the Bay Area where you are. What does this allow us to do, or what can it allow us to do?
This mapping exercise is, I suppose it's supposed to help us understand two things. The first is a very simple thing. Let's say I'm an employer and I'm thinking, I want to put my business someplace where I need just a bunch of people who are going to be able to have these skills and work for me. Okay. You could look at this map and say, oh, where are these people located? Okay, that's kind of a useful thing. I should note, for instance, that although some of the parts of the map are not a surprise, like it's not a surprise that the Bay Area has a whole bunch of people with cognitive skills, and so does Boston, and so forth and so on. But look at the upper Midwest, southern Minnesota, parts of Wisconsin, Iowa, parts of Nebraska. Wait, there are a whole bunch of people there with advanced cognitive skills. There's a pretty big concentration. If I were maybe some type of employer, I might say, hey, I should be locating some type of, so that's the first thing you can do with that. The second thing that you can do with this map is try to understand causality. Try to get at, why is it that some areas have so much more than other areas? And I should say, one of the key things that you might take away from this map is that it is not about race and ethnicity. If you look at this map, it doesn't look like a racial ethnic map of the United States, because some of the biggest advanced cognitive skill deserts in the United States are virtually all white. Okay, so they're not all, that's not true of all of them, but I'm just saying it's not about race and ethnicity. It's a different thing. And I think Americans immediately jump to this notion that, oh, it's all about education, it's all about race and ethnicity, it's all about stuff like that. The other thing to note is that the advanced cognitive skill deserts don't really start to show up until adolescence, which tells us that there are a lot of kids who, as of third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, still appear to be very capable of gaining these skills. They don't, but they're very capable of doing it. And that's, I think, the kind of optimistic side of this paper is it's not all determined when you're age 3 or age 4.
Which is a very optimistic point about government intervention and resources. Could you talk a little bit about the one group I don't think we've talked directly about is the presence of skilled teachers in different geographic locales, because that's also, I guess, the other half of the equation.
That is the other half of the equation. And let me just make this point because I want to emphasize how wonderful the age of adolescence is for being able to transform someone to having these skills, but also how dangerous that sort of middle school, early adolescence age is. I don't know if you all have ever met teachers who started teaching, but nobody likes to teach middle schoolers. Okay. They're a pain in the neck. Okay. Pretty much. So it turns out that the least experienced, least well-paid teachers in the United States, the ones who are most likely to be substitute teachers, where there are the most vacancies, everything like that, are middle school teachers. And this problem is true throughout the whole United States. It would be true in an affluent suburb in, Chicago, and it would be also true in a poor county in Appalachia. But the difference is that in a poor county in Appalachia, the absence of skilled middle school teachers is particularly acute because those rural or semi-rural schools already have problems attracting teachers. Okay. And so if they already have problems attracting teachers, then in their middle school grades, it's really acute. So if you look at just the spending on middle school students, it's also the lowest in the United States. We spend more on little kiddies and we spend more on kids at the end of high school.
If you could suggest or have one recommendation as we move to this post-COVID period, hopefully in the near future, what would you recommend that we focus on?
As far as the reentry
and anticipating what these students, have gone through over these 13, 14, hopefully not too many more months.
Well, I think schools are probably going to have to prioritize some grades over others. That's just realistic, right? Bringing back some kids faster than they bring back others. I would really advocate for their bringing back early adolescence, the sort of middle school grades, and bringing back students who are at the very end of high school so that they don't have much of a chance to make up for deficits that they're experiencing. And as much as I am empathetic with parents who are frustrated by having their first grader or second grader at home, I think I would say to parents of first graders and second graders, your child's education is probably not suffering that much. Get back as fast as you can, try to do a good job as a parent, but also recognize that your child has many more years to make up for this.
Well, I think our executive producer, Mary Griffiths, can be very happy to hear that. Not that her children are showing any deficits, but that, she did have some home time. Now they're in school and they're of the age you're talking about. So she's been taking careful notes as discussion's been going on.
Yes, I think she has an almost 8-year-old and almost 7-year-old.
Yeah, so she definitely was taking notes. But thanks so much. This has been great. I mean, what an informed piece of research and just a great contribution to what we're trying to do with the podcast. So we want to thank you very much for joining us today and continued success as you get these views out, because I think they're really, really pragmatically, realistically important for where we're going.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. I'm a real admirer of the Marist Poll, so this has been a lot of fun for me.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in beautiful Poughkeepsie, New York. I'm Mary Griffith and Poll Hub's executive producer. Thanks so much for joining us today. Rounding out our production team are Casey Schaff, our production supervisor, Amelia Morell, our production assistant, and Marcello Bettman, our trusted editor. Of course, thanks to the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University. They provide us with the ability to look back at survey questions and results over the decades. And if you have questions or comments, reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter and Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. Finally, if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please consider leaving us a review on your podcasting app of choice. Positive reviews help others find us. And while you're at it, why not go ahead and subscribe? Again, thanks for being here. We'll catch you next week.